So this has been a huge request from you guys, especially since we started doing those ERB reactions and a few other history reactions. So number one, thank you so much for the support. We really appreciate it. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. It really helps us out. We're not even asking for the notification bell. Just subscribe. So this was a huge request. Again, Oversimplified, World War II, Part 1. And again, if you get annoyed by historians interrupting videos and pausing, this is not the video for you. We're going to drop some knowledge today.
It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns.
That's the best part. Imagine you're an adult now. You're like, oh man, you're talking to your friends. You're like, man, don't you miss school? And you had Mussolini as your school teacher. You're like, not really. Why? What was so bad about your school teacher? It was Mussolini, bruh.
Turns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I.
That's going to become a big point in World War II, is Italy's desire to reclaim Libya.
Came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war. But his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian people just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it Fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
Oh, this is fantastic. Oversimplified. I'm loving it already.
We gotta do more.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it.
Now, eventually, they were on the winner's side of World War I, but that is because they ended up switching sides. But again, one of the reasons why you get the rise of Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, all happening at the same time, we'll get into it, I'm sure, later on. But one of the big driving forces, if not the biggest driving force, is World War I. Because World War I, Germany is devastated because Germany is blamed for everything. But even though Italy was on the winning side after switching sides, a lot of what Italy was promised with the Treaty of Versailles, Italy doesn't get. And Mussolini sees this as a huge stab in the back. And that becomes one of the driving forces for World War II. World War II literally starts brewing as soon as World War I ends, but much like the Star Wars prequels, it takes a while to get into it.
But in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, make me prime minister or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army.
I mean, pretty much. And it's mirrored all over because this is literally almost the same thing that happens in Germany. We'll get into the economy, I'm sure, a little later on.
He went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's...
Now, to be fair, during World War I, Hitler didn't have the Hitler mustache. Hitler actually had a full mustache during World War I. But yeah, the economy was catastrophic. So the biggest issue with the Treaty of Versailles for Germany specifically was the war reparation. So the Treaty of Versailles is basically the terms of Germany's surrender in World War I. And a lot of things that Oversimplified just mentioned. So big issue was the reparations they had to pay to the winning side in the war. And it was a catastrophic amount. And one of the things that the brilliant minds in Germany decided to do was, well, we owe all this money, so they decided to play by monopoly rules. Let's just print more money. What happens when you print more money? It devalues the currency. So people end up getting paid twice a day because they were making so much money, but the money was worthless. People were walking around with wheelbarrows full of money. It was absolutely worthless. So again, you have all of these components that allow for somebody like Mussolini, Hitler to rise, and we've seen it in many other countries.
I actually want to see a picture of Hitler when he was in World War I. I bet he's going to be even more hilarious.
Oh, yeah? Take a look right here.
That's him.
Yep.
Humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attended a march on Munich with his boys.
Well, I understand it's oversimplified. So he did not help create the party. So the German Worker Party already existed. And he joined the party right after World War I ends in 1919. But because of his enigma, because of whatever you want to call it, his gravitas, of course, his speaking ability, he quickly rises in the ranks and becomes the leader of the German Worker Party and renames it the National Socialist German Worker Party. And that's where the word Nazi comes from. It's an abbreviation of National Socialist. So Nazi. And he becomes the leader of the party. They attempt the beer hall putsch. So eventually the Nazis rise to power absolutely legally. So it is through elections. Now, they don't have overwhelming majority, but they have enough votes to get into power, where Hitler eventually becomes chancellor, and then, of course, the Führer of Germany. But they did originally attempt to overthrow the government.
And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac.
And of course, while he's in jail, he spends a year in jail after the beer hall putsch, and that's where he writes his biography / plan for the future of Germany, which is Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. And he outlines, of course, his biography, but also his vision. And his vision, of course, is for a pure Germany, for Germany to reacquire everything they lost in the Versailles Treaty, to return to its former power. And of course, he outlines all the mistakes of World War I as well. And the big mistake he felt in World War I was having to fight on two fronts. So, of course, we'll see he declares a pact with Stalin in 1939 to avoid a two-front war.
Maniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China.
Japan. Oh my God. This is one of the biggest things that I teach in my history courses. I spend a lot of emphasis on Japan because I always want to teach my students and other people things that usually aren't taught in history class. So Japan, for many reasons, we forget the true atrocities that Japan did during and way before World War II. I always argue, people say World War II starts September 1939 when Germany invades Poland. I contend World War II was already starting way before that. Japan invades China, specifically Manchuria, in 1931. And then, of course, one of the most disgusting periods of the 20th century is Japan's, treatment of China, especially what becomes known as the Rape of Nanking. Japan does most of the same things that Germany does. Number one, mass murder, ethnic cleansing, experimentation upon the populace of China, doing gross medical experiments, chemical experiments because they were trying to create chemical weaponry, encouragement to literally rape Chinese women. It is one of the most disgusting periods in all of human history, but for whatever reason, it really doesn't get talked about a lot. And Japan kind of gets a pass. I mean, really look into it, people. It is absolutely an atrocity.
Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train.
Not maybe. 100% definitely. I was going to mention this after this section.
The train?
But they're mentioning it right now. Yeah, it wasn't just a train. They basically did the same thing that Germany ends up doing with, Kristallnacht, which is basically setting up, all these different attacks and then, of course, blaming it on the Jews and blaming it on other undesirables, when in fact, they were the ones who did it.
In Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing.
Pimped out his army, I love that.
First Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his...
I saw that before.
Exhibit, what's up? Pimp that ride. I used to love that show. But yeah, this begins what's known as the period of appeasement. He begins basically testing the waters like a true bully, right? Like they say, well, the best way to get rid of a bully is just to ignore him. Not really, because all they're going to do is push the boundaries and see, hey, I can get this far. Let me see if I can get even further. Best way to get rid of a bully is to punch him square in the jaw. But the first thing he does is he starts building up his army. And then he sees the Allies do nothing about it. They don't say anything. Then, of course, he starts taking back territories that Germany had lost. So the Sudetenland, the Rhineland, eventually annexing Austria, which was Hitler's birthplace. The Allies are really doing nothing. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, not really saying anything. But here's the interesting thing. And this is, of course, no defense of Hitler. There's no defending Hitler. But Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, for their people, they were heroes. because they did bring them back from the brink of a national bankruptcy, moral bankruptcy, financial bankruptcy, everything else. They did amazing work, and it's sad. I mean, it's human nature, you know, with the superiority, we're back. But if they used their influence for good, they would have been amazing leaders. Because even Winston Churchill, after Chamberlain, even though Churchill was not the first choice was Halifax, but when Halifax turned it down, then Churchill gets the job. What's the first thing Churchill does? Effectively cancels democracy by setting up his own type of government. And he said, all I have to offer is my blood, my toil, my work, and my tears. But the rest, you got to leave up to me. So he suspends democracy just as much. Well, maybe not as much, of course. That's overstating it. But the other thing is, Churchill said, if Germany eventually makes it into England, he authorized the use of chemical warfare, of biological weapons. Thankfully, it never happened because Germany never made it into there. But I do want to emphasize that for people to understand, like, how could the Germans let this happen? How could Italy let this happen? To many, Stalin, if you even look in our comments instead of some of our reactions, Russians vehemently still defend Stalin. They view him as a hero because he helped Russia rise out of the ashes of the revolution. And Hitler and Mussolini did the same thing for their countries. Until then, they turned to much darker paths, of course.
The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing, and the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And
I know, I just spent like several minutes trying to explain this, and then oversimplified as like, we can oversimplify that, Teacher Eddie. But the other interesting thing also is Hitler did have a lot of sympathy across the globe, even in the United States. People like Henry Ford lauded him as a hero. When Charlie Chaplin makes his famous movie, The Great Dictator, and basically making a fool of Hitler and showing the world what a piece of crap Hitler was and how he was treating Jewish people, the world hated Chaplin for it. He got so much negative feedback until the war breaks out. And after the war, then people laud Chaplin as a genius, of course. But Hitler was voted Time's Man of the Year. Time magazine votes Hitler in 1938 as their Man of the Year for the amazing work he's doing in Germany. He is voted in 1939 as a contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. Right? So you have to understand, it wasn't automatic that people were like, man, that Hitler, what a terrible dude. No, he was applauded by many, many, many. And, well, I'll get into it later.
And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Yeah. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, look, we're going to give you what... Hang on. This meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too?
Nope.
Anyway, we're going to give you what you want. Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace. And we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia.
Yep, that's exactly what he did.
You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is?
Abyssinia, yeah.
Fantastic.
Abyssinia is modern-day Ethiopia, by the way.
What?
Well, they're saying...
literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is?
Yeah, so Abyssinia. So Abyssinia is now Ethiopia. for those, just in case if you didn't know.
Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched
Okay, that I'm not sure about. I'm not very familiar with that, so obviously I'm not going to comment on it.
Maybe it probably.
Yeah, so that one I am not sure about.
Another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against...
Now, I am much respect. Now, first of all, Oversimplified, it's definitely please support them. If you haven't watched their original video, please also give them a watch on their page and give them a like. If you're going to give anyone a like, make sure you give it to Oversimplified, because we're just reacting to the video. They created the video, so we want to give them mad props. But also, aside from the fact this is very well made, it's interesting. I mean, yes, it's oversimplified, but it's funny. It's funny. It's a great way to get, especially kids, involved. But much respect for them for actually mentioning Nanking, which many people just gloss over when they discuss World War II.
Against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, how about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future. Sounds... good.
Now, just to clarify, Hitler and Stalin never actually spoke directly. They had representatives. I don't remember the name of the German representative who went to Russia. I do remember the Russian representative's name because his name is Molotov. You know what Molotov is? No. The Molotov cocktail, right? It's
they use it they use it in Modern Warfare.
Yes, Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So it's named after Molotov, and Molotov was actually the representative who met with the German representative to lay out the 1939 pact. So just to clear that up, because Hitler and Stalin were not friends, they were actually complete enemies. But it was, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It was that type of situation. It wasn't like Hitler and Mussolini. Hitler and Mussolini, very close. Hitler idolized Mussolini because Mussolini, of course, comes a decade before Hitler does in Italy. And Hitler does model himself a lot after Mussolini.
This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany.
Yes.
The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much.
Very true. Absolutely true.
The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother
Yes, the Maginot Line. So before I get to the Maginot Line, I just wanted to make a quick point. In 1940, Hitler actually sued England for peace. Now, again, not defending Hitler, but also you really can't ignore parts of history, right? To the victor go the spoils, how they say, the winners write history. So, of course, America, England, they're all made to look like, oh, we were perfect, we were angels. Look, in 1939, Hitler, because again, the final solution, the extermination of the Jews, does not come till much later. Hitler just wanted the Jews out of Germany. So Hitler offered all of the Ally powers and all the neutral countries as well, Norway, Sweden, England, America, to take the Jews as refugees. Without a single exception, none of them wanted to take the Jews in. Okay? There was even, during the war, with the help of Europeans, they got a bunch of Jews on boats and sent them out to England, to America. There was one freighter that made it all the way to Florida. It was right on the coast of Florida, and guess what America did?
What?
Turned them right around, said, we're not accepting you. Okay? And I'm going to do a video, actually, what happened to the survivors of the Holocaust after the war, because the atrocities continued for many, many years by the Allies themselves, which is not written in history. Okay? And as a Jew, of course, it's also very important for me. And so I do encourage you. As educators, all we can do is spark your interest. It's then your job to go and really delve into it more.
Extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy.
Now, again, I apologize. I am so sorry, but there's just so much here. So let's just go back a second to the Maginot Line. So the Maginot Line, so one of the big issues why France falls, right?
Is along their German border, but didn't bother
So the Maginot Line, as you can see, the solid white, I'm pointing at the screen like people can see. Hey, here you go. Can you see my cursor? So the Maginot Line, which is right here, oh, you can't even see my cursor. Crap. So the Maginot Line is a solid white line. So this was the point of defense in World War I, okay? And France figured, hey, it's probably going to be a repeat, right? Like it's a remake. They're rebooting World War I. So basically, this is all they fortify because this is what they think is going, this is where the fighting's going to happen. And like Oversimplify very well mentioned, France was stuck in World War I, whereas what worked for Germany was the fact that Hitler did recognize all the mistakes that were made in World War I. Not just the battle on two fronts, but now the heavy use of tanks, the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, which was superior to anything, at the beginning of the war, at least, that, England or anybody else had. America had basically no Air Force whatsoever to speak of until the war starts and Roosevelt demands that 100,000 planes be built. So what does Hitler do? Hitler's like, all right, I guess we're just going to go around the Maginot Line. Right? So Hitler adapts in World War II by learning from the mistakes of World War I, whereas France is still sitting on its laurels and figuring, hey, we're just going to do what worked the first time.
extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your airfields. But Norway and Sweden still said no, so the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport...
Norway and Sweden decide. Now, again, I apologize for part. Now, I did look at a couple of history teachers' reactions to these videos just to kind of see, like, how many times did they pause trying to get an idea? And all due respect to all of them, they all give some good insights, but really, they just watch the videos for long periods of time without really analyzing, reacting, or mentioning anything. And I'm like, well, then what's the point, kind of? So... again, if you don't like me pausing so much, if you don't like me, analyzing, explaining these things, which is, again, my job as a teacher and what I enjoy to do, there are plenty of other history teachers that you can go and watch, or you could just go and watch people who have no clue what the hell is going on and being like, man, I wonder what that's all about. Hey, let me know in the comments below what Germany is.
Hey.
Right? But, of course, Germany didn't care that Norway was neutral or Sweden was neutral. They were like, man, we're taking that. Don't worry. They were like Killmonger and Black Panther 2. No, don't worry. I'm going to take that off your hands. Oh, you got that ore? You got that good ore? I'll take that off your hands.
Ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. the Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned, and
Oh, it was not slightly embarrassing. It was extremely embarrassing.
was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war.
Yes, which was a modification of what was known as the Schlieffen Plan, which was Germany's plan of attack in World War I. But again, he modifies it slightly, of course, mainly with not fighting a two front war simultaneously, but eventually, yes, after defeating the West.
During the Phony War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve.
Yep.
Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they...
Blitzkrieg, which stands for Lightning War. Shock and awe, baby. I'm taking the whole army in. We're bringing all the tanks. We're bringing all the Luftwaffe. We're bringing everything because we're going to end this quick like a Mike Tyson fight circa the 1980s. We're going for the first round knockout, baby.
You know how to speak German very well.
Really?
Yeah.
I just know the words. I don't actually... Я говорю по-русски. Я могу говорить по-русски. I speak Russian, but not German. I can do a good German accent. No, I can't.
They sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too. But they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that.
Just like that in 40-something days. I think it was 45 or 46 days, right? So what took, 4 years and didn't work in World War I, Hitler completed in 40 days in World War II, which is taking over France. Dunkirk was a victory and a loss at the same time. So it was a victory because Germany had a chance to really just cripple England beyond repair. It was a big mistake because Hitler listened to, who was it? It was Goering, Hermann Goering. Goering was like a jealous side chick. He was trying to work his way up to like main girlfriend, main chick. So he advised Hitler, he's like, look, the Luftwaffe is killing it, son. So why don't we, don't send in the troops. Let's save our troops. Let's just bomb them with all the Luftwaffe. Dunkirk really wasn't a battle. Dunkirk was just them trying to escape. Right? Kind of like General Washington tries to get all of his troops out of New York. England could have ended the war as soon as it began, the Revolutionary War. But they made the mistake of underestimating the Americans and letting Washington escape New York. So Dunkirk was a success because they did get the vast majority of their English troops and English citizens out of harm's way. So they saved like almost 400,000. They lost about 60 or 70,000. But it was a victory in the sense that they were able to escape. But it was a loss at the same time because even Churchill said, you don't win wars by retreating.
Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides.
France.
Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel.
Now, one of the questions I get from a lot of students and a lot of people in general is, why were they so interested in Africa? Well, number one, Mussolini's big dream was really to recreate the Roman Empire. He really wanted to be another Caesar. So taking control of Africa, and especially Egypt, for him was a huge goal. But also the other big important thing was because it had access to the Suez Canal. And if you have access to the Suez Canal, then you have access for trading, supplies, and everything else from what will become another Axis power, which is Japan, and also Japan's control of China, right? So they can get a lot of supplies through, far eastern spaces that would be much difficult to reach if you don't have control of the Suez Canal.
Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside, away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel.
Yeah, you know what? Just for all the people who are like, man, stop infringing on my human rights by making me wear a mask so I don't infect other people with coronavirus and such. Take a look at this picture and take a look at this perspective. These are average people who are like, yeah, our city's getting bombed to hell. We're all crammed into this train station, but you know what? Keep on smiling.
This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
All right, so that was part one. So bravo. I do want to mention one more thing. This is something that has been completely written out of history. The RMS Lancastria. So the Lancastria was after Dunkirk. There were, of course, a lot of English citizens and nationals left in France. So they were trying to get them out any way possible, and one of the ways was using cruise liners. And they packed, from top to bottom, everyone was crammed in, and then Germany bombs the Lancastria and sinks it. And the loss of life was tremendous. But because it happened so close to Dunkirk, the English government, and Churchill, of course, at the top, decide to not, completely cover it up because they felt it would destroy English morale. So it is a very fascinating topic. It gets kind of lost to history, but if you ever want to look it up, definitely look up the RMS Lancastria. So guys, we appreciate it so much. The other thing we'd appreciate if you'd watch one of our other videos
and playlists,
or a playlist. And of course, we're going to react to part 2 soon. And we want to thank our Hall of Fame patrons. If you want to support us on Patreon, please check it out.
James,
Spacey Doodle,
Elena,
Ulrike,
Clement,
Vijandra, Alex,
Baba Mom,
Aaron Shepard,
Big JJ,
and Will Streets. We've been Modern Retro Show, and we'll see you
next time.